The Arizona Territory in 1887 was not a kind place. The sun beat down on the cracked earth like a hammer on an anvil. Day after day, week after week, Jacob Morrison stood at the edge of his property, looking out at land that used to be green. Now it was just dust and dying grass. His cattle, the few that remained, looked thin and tired. Their ribs showed through their hides. Jacob was 42 years old, but he looked older. The sun and the hard life had carved lines deep into his face. His hands were rough and calloused from years of work. He wore a faded shirt and pants that had been patched so many times, he could barely remember what they looked like when they were new. 2 years ago, his wife had passed away from fever. Since then, Jacob had been alone on this ranch. No children. No family nearby. Just him, his cattle, and the unforgiving land. Some days he wondered why he kept going. But something in him refused to give up. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was hope. He honestly didn't know anymore. The drought had started 6 months back. At first, people thought it would pass. Droughts always did eventually. But this one kept going. The creek that ran through Jacob's property had dried up completely. His well was running low. Every drop of water was precious now. He had to choose between drinking it himself or giving it to his cattle. Most days the cattle won. They were his livelihood. Without them, he had nothing. That afternoon, Jacob decided to check the well again. He needed to know how much water was left. Maybe enough for another week. Maybe less. He walked across his property, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The air was so hot it felt like walking into an oven. Sweat ran down his back and his throat felt like sandpaper. The well was near the eastern edge of his land, close to where his property ended and the open territory began. As he got closer, he noticed something strange. There were marks in the dust. Someone had been here, recently. Jacob's hand moved to the old revolver he kept on his hip. Times were dangerous. Tensions between settlers and the native tribes had been getting worse. People on both sides were angry, scared, and quick to violence. Jacob had always tried to stay out of it. He just wanted to work his land in peace. But peace was becoming harder to find. He followed the marks in the dust. They led away from the well, toward a cluster of rocks and dying bushes. That's when he saw him. A man lay on the ground, half hidden in the shade of a large rock. He was Native American. That much was clear from his clothing and long black hair. And he was hurt badly. Blood soaked through his shirt on the left side near his shoulder. His face was pale, covered in dust and sweat. His breathing came in short, painful gasps. Jacob froze. His mind raced. He knew what his neighbors would say if they found out he'd helped a native man. William Garrett, who owned the ranch to the south, had made his feelings very clear. "The only good Indian is a dead Indian," he'd said more than once, usually after a few drinks. Others felt the same way. But Jacob looked at the man lying there, bleeding and dying, and he couldn't see an enemy. He just saw another human being in pain. The man's eyes flickered open. They were dark and filled with fear. He tried to move, to get away, but he was too weak. His hand reached toward something, maybe a weapon, but he didn't have the strength. "Easy there," Jacob said softly. He held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The man didn't understand English, or if he did, he didn't trust the words. His breathing got faster. Panic filled his eyes. Jacob slowly knelt down, keeping his movements calm and steady. He could see the wound now. A gunshot. The bullet had gone clean through, which was good, but the man had lost a lot of blood. Without help, he would die, probably before nightfall. "I'm going to help you," Jacob said, even though he knew the man probably didn't understand. Sometimes the tone of voice mattered more than the words. He looked back toward his cabin. It was a good quarter-mile away. The man was too heavy to drag that far, especially in this heat, and moving him might make the bleeding worse. Jacob made a decision. He had a small barn closer than the cabin. It wasn't much, just a place to store hay and tools, but it had shade and walls. Jacob went back to the well and pulled up a bucket of water. Precious, precious water. He carried it back to the wounded man and carefully lifted his head. "Drink," he said, holding the ladle to the man's lips. The man's eyes widened when he tasted the water. He drank deeply, desperately. Some of the color returned to his face. When he finished, he said something in his own language. The words were soft, barely a whisper. "Save your strength," Jacob told him. He tore a strip from his own shirt and pressed it against the wound to slow the bleeding. Then, as gently as he could, he lifted the man. He wasn't a big person, but he was solid, all muscle and bone. Jacob staggered under the weight. Step by step, Jacob carried him toward the barn. His back screamed in protest. His legs shook. The sun hammered down on both of them, but he kept going. When he finally reached the barn and laid the man down on a pile of hay, Jacob thought his heart might burst from his chest. He went back for more water and for his small medical kit. It wasn't much, just some bandages, some whiskey for cleaning wounds, and a needle and thread for stitching. His wife had been the one who knew about healing. Jacob had only watched and learned a little. He hoped it would be enough. Through the long afternoon and into the evening, Jacob worked. He cleaned the wound with water and whiskey. The man groaned in pain but didn't cry out. Jacob wrapped clean bandages around his shoulder, using up most of what he had. He gave him more water and a little bit of dried beef to chew on. As darkness fell, the man finally seemed to rest easier. His breathing became more regular. The bleeding had stopped. He might actually survive. Jacob sat against the barn wall, exhausted. He should go back to his cabin, get some sleep. But something made him stay. Maybe he worried the man would die if left alone. Maybe he just felt like the right thing to do was keep watch. The night air cooled things down a bit. Stars appeared overhead, thousands of them, so bright and clear they looked close enough to touch. Jacob thought about his wife, about how she used to say that every person was put on earth for a reason. He'd never been sure he believed that. But tonight, sitting here with this dying stranger, he wondered if maybe she'd been right. The man stirred and opened his eyes. For a moment, their gazes met. The fear was gone now. In its place was something else. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition. The man said something, words that Jacob couldn't understand, but the tone was clear. He was saying thank you. Jacob nodded. "You're welcome," he said quietly. The man reached into a pouch at his belt. His movements were weak, shaky. He pulled something out and pressed it into Jacob's hand. It was small and leather, tied with a thin cord. The man said something else, more urgent this time. Then his eyes closed and he drifted back into unconscious rest. Jacob looked at what he'd been given but didn't open it. Not yet. He put it in his pocket and settled back against the wall. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. Tonight he'd done what he could. He'd given water to a man who needed it. He'd shown mercy when he could have turned away. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Jacob had no idea that this simple act of kindness would change his life forever. He didn't know that by morning, his small ranch would become the center of something much bigger than himself. All he knew was that he'd made a choice, and for better or worse, he'd have to live with it. Jacob woke with a start as the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the barn walls. His neck was stiff from sleeping against the hard wooden wall and his back ached something fierce. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then everything came rushing back. The wounded man. The blood. The water he'd shared. He looked over to where he'd left the native man resting on the hay. The spot was empty. Jacob scrambled to his feet, his heart suddenly pounding. Had the man died? Had someone taken him? He looked around the barn frantically. That's when he saw the blood-stained bandages neatly folded and left on the hay. Next to them lay the small leather pouch the man had pressed into his hand last night. The man was gone. Just vanished into the early morning like smoke. Jacob walked over and picked up the bandages. They were still slightly damp with blood. So it hadn't been a dream. It had really happened. A man had been here badly wounded and now he was gone. Jacob couldn't figure out how someone that hurt could have gotten up and left. The man could barely lift his head last night. Now he'd somehow managed to slip away without making a sound. He picked up the leather pouch and untied the cord. Inside were 7 stones, each about the size of his thumb. But these weren't ordinary rocks. Each one had been carefully painted with different symbols and designs. One had a red spiral. Another showed what looked like a mountain with a sun above it. A third had a blue zigzag pattern like lightning. The other 4 had symbols Jacob had never seen before. He turned them over in his rough hands, studying them in the growing light. They were beautiful, clearly important. But what did they mean? Why had the man given them to him? Jacob put the stones back in the pouch and slipped it into his pocket. He had work to do, wounded stranger or not. The cattle still needed tending. The well still needed checking. Life on a failing ranch didn't stop for mysteries. He stepped out of the barn into the cool morning air. The sun was just starting to peek over the eastern hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It would be hot again soon. It was always hot these days. Jacob made his way to the well and pulled up what water he could spare for his cattle. There were only 15 head left now. He'd started the year with 40. Some he'd sold off when the drought started, hoping to get a bit of money while he could. Others had simply died, too weak to survive without enough water and grass. These last 15 were tough. They'd made it this far. He hoped they could make it a bit further. As he was pouring water into the trough, he heard the sound of a horse approaching. Jacob's jaw tightened. He knew that horse. It belonged to William Garrett. Garrett was a big man, tall and thick around the middle. He owned the ranch to the south, about 3 miles away. He'd been out here longer than Jacob, almost 20 years, and he liked everyone to know it. He rode up to Jacob's property line and stopped, his horse snorting and stamping. "Morning, Morrison," Garrett called out. His voice carried easily across the dusty ground. "Morning," Jacob replied, not moving from his spot by the trough. Garrett walked his horse a bit closer. His face was red from the sun and his eyes were small and hard. "Thought I'd better ride out and warn you." Group of Apache warriors was spotted in the area yesterday evening. Maybe 10 or 12 of them. Riding fast, heading this direction. Jacob's stomach tightened, but he kept his face neutral. "That so?" "That's so," Garrett said, spitting into the dust. "You'd best keep your eyes open and your rifle close. These are dangerous times. Can't trust any of them." "I'll be careful," Jacob said. Garrett studied him for a long moment. "You know, Morrison, I've always wondered about you. You keep to yourself out here. Never join in when the rest of us go hunting for raiders. Makes a man wonder whose side you're on." Jacob felt a flash of anger but pushed it down. "I'm not on anybody's side. I'm just trying to survive and mind my own business." "Well, that's the problem, isn't it?" Garrett leaned forward in his saddle. "These days a man has to pick a side. There's us and there's them. Simple as that. And anyone who helps them, anyone who shows them mercy or kindness, well..." He let the threat hang in the air. "I hear you," Jacob said quietly. Garrett nodded, satisfied. "Good. Just wanted to make sure we understand each other." He turned his horse around and rode off, leaving a trail of dust behind him. Jacob watched him go, his jaw clenched tight. He thought about the man he'd helped last night. If Garrett had known, there would have been real trouble. Maybe violence. Jacob wasn't a coward, but he also wasn't a fool. Going against men like Garrett could cost a person everything. He spent the rest of the morning doing his usual work, but his mind kept wandering back to the wounded man and the 7 painted stones. Every now and then, he'd reach into his pocket and touch the leather pouch, just to make sure it was still there. Around midday, Jacob decided to ride out and check his fence lines. Some of the posts had been getting loose, and with cattle as valuable as they were now, he couldn't risk any getting out. He saddled up his old horse, a gray mare named Bella, who'd been with him for 8 years, and headed out across his property. The work was hot and dusty. Jacob fixed 3 posts and replaced some broken wire. The sun climbed higher and the heat became almost unbearable. He stopped to take a drink from his canteen, tilting his head back to get the last few drops. That's when he saw it, dust clouds, multiple dust clouds rising in the distance from different directions. Jacob lowered the canteen slowly. His heart started beating faster. He pulled out his small spyglass, an old one that had belonged to his father, and looked through it. Riders. Lots of riders. They were too far away to see clearly, but they were definitely coming this way. He counted the dust clouds. 7 different groups approaching from 7 different directions. His mouth went dry, and it wasn't from thirst. Jacob climbed back on Bella and rode hard back toward his cabin. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe they were just passing through. But the timing seemed too perfect. The wounded man disappearing in the night. The warning from Garrett about Apache in the area. And now this. He reached his cabin and quickly stabled Bella in the small barn. Then he went inside and pulled out his rifle. It was a Winchester, well-maintained but old. He checked that it was loaded, then grabbed his revolver too. He had maybe 50 rounds of ammunition total. Not much if it came to a real fight. Jacob positioned himself by the window where he could see out across his land. The dust clouds were getting closer now. He could make out the shapes of horses and riders. His hands were sweating despite the heat. Through the spyglass he could finally see them clearly. His breath caught in his throat. They were Native Americans. Dozens of them. And they weren't just passing through. They were spreading out, positioning themselves in a circle around his entire property, north, south, east, west, and everything in between. They were surrounding him. Jacob's hand tightened on his rifle. His small ranch, his 200 acres of struggling land, was being encircled by what looked like over 100 warriors from different tribes. He could tell they were from different groups because of their clothing and markings. This wasn't just one tribe. This was something bigger. He thought about running, but where would he go? They had him completely boxed in. He thought about fighting, but that would be suicide. All he could do was wait and see what they wanted. The riders reached his property boundaries and stopped. They just sat there on their horses waiting. Not attacking. Not advancing. Just waiting. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. Jacob's muscles ached from tension, from holding his rifle ready for so long. Still, they waited. Then, as the sun reached its highest point in the sky, Jacob saw something change. One of the groups, the one directly in front of his cabin, began to move. A single rider came forward carrying something white, a flag of truce. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest. This was it. Whatever was about to happen, it was happening now. He set down his rifle, knowing it wouldn't help him anyway. If they wanted him dead, he'd be dead already. He walked out onto his porch, his hands visible and empty, and waited to find out why 7 tribes had surrounded his land. The rider with the white flag moved slowly across Jacob's property, his horse walking at a steady pace. Jacob stood on his porch trying to keep his breathing calm. His hands wanted to shake, but he forced them to stay still at his sides. Show fear now and everything could go wrong. Behind the single rider, the circle of warriors remained motionless. Jacob had never seen anything like it. This wasn't a raiding party. This wasn't an attack. It was something else entirely. Something organized and purposeful. The different tribes sat together in sections, their horses painted with various markings and symbols. The rider got closer, and Jacob could see him more clearly now. He was an older man, maybe in his 60s, with long gray hair braided down his back. He wore traditional clothing decorated with intricate beadwork and feathers. His face was weathered and lined, like old leather left too long in the sun. But his eyes were sharp and intelligent. Behind him rode a younger man, maybe 30 years old, who sat straight and proud on his horse. This second rider wore a mix of traditional and settler clothing, and something about the way he carried himself suggested importance. They stopped about 20 feet from Jacob's porch. The older man raised his hand in a gesture of peace. Jacob raised his hand in return, unsure of what else to do. The younger man spoke first, and Jacob nearly fell over with relief. He spoke English. "You are Jacob Morrison?" the young man asked. "I am," Jacob replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "This is Chief White Eagle of the Apache," the young man said, gesturing to the older man. "I am Standing Wolf. I speak for him and for the others who have come here today." Jacob nodded slowly. "Why have you come?" Chief White Eagle spoke in his own language, his voice deep and resonant. Standing Wolf translated, "We have come because of something that happened on this land 2 nights ago. Something that has not happened in the memory of our oldest elders." Jacob's mind raced back to the wounded man in his barn. His hand unconsciously moved toward his pocket where the leather pouch with 7 stones rested. "You gave water and aid to a man who was dying," Standing Wolf continued, translating the chief's words. "A man who was shot by those who hunt our people for money. You could have left him to die. No one would have known. No one would have blamed you. But you did not. You shared your water, which is precious in these dry times. You tended his wounds. You sat with him through the night." Jacob swallowed hard. He was hurt, dying. "I couldn't just walk away." Chief White Eagle spoke again, and this time Jacob saw emotion in the old man's eyes. Standing Wolf's voice was softer as he translated. "The man you saved is called Running Bear. He is my grandson," the chief said, placing his hand over his heart. "He is my daughter's son. He is precious to me." Jacob felt his legs go weak. He'd saved a chief's grandson. No wonder all these people were here. Running Bear was carrying messages between the tribes, Standing Wolf continued. Messages of peace. "For many moons we have been trying to bring the tribes together, to stop fighting among ourselves and to find a way to live alongside your people, without more blood being spilled. But there are those on both sides who do not want peace. Men who hunt us for gold. Settlers who want all natives dead or driven away. Chief White Eagle pulled something from a pouch at his side. Jacob recognized it immediately. It was identical to the one in his pocket. The chief spoke, his voice strong despite his age. Standing Wolf translated, "Running Bear told us of your kindness. He said you looked at him not with hate but with compassion. You saw not an enemy but a man in need. He gave you 7 stones, yes? Each stone represents one of the 7 tribes that have been meeting in secret, trying to forge peace." Jacob pulled out the leather pouch and held it up. "I didn't know what they meant." "They mean hope," Standing Wolf said, and Jacob couldn't tell if those words were translation or his own. When Running Bear returned to us and told his story, Chief White Eagle sent word to all 7 tribes. He told them of the white settler who showed mercy, who shared water in a time of drought, who risked the anger of his own people to save a native life. Chief White Eagle climbed down from his horse. It was clearly difficult for him, his movements stiff with age, but he refused any help. He walked slowly toward Jacob's porch. Jacob came down the steps to meet him, not sure what protocol demanded, but feeling that staying on the porch would be disrespectful. They stood face to face, this old chief and the struggling rancher. Chief White Eagle reached out and placed both hands on Jacob's shoulders. He spoke directly to Jacob, his eyes locked on his. Standing Wolf translated from his horse. "You gave my grandson water when he had none. You gave him shelter when he had nowhere to go. You gave him life when death was close. In our ways, this creates a bond, a debt that must be honored. But more than that, you have shown us something we thought no longer existed. You have shown us that there are still good people in this world, regardless of the color of their skin or the language they speak." Jacob felt tears prick at his eyes. He blinked them back. "I just did what anyone should do." "But no one else did," Standing Wolf said. "Many settlers would have killed him. Most would have let him die. You alone showed mercy." Chief White Eagle released Jacob's shoulders and turned to gesture at the warriors surrounding the property. He spoke again, his voice rising so that all could hear. Standing Wolf translated, his voice carrying across the dusty land. "All 7 tribes have come here today. Apache, Navajo, Hopi, Pueblo, Paiute, Yavapai, and Zuni. We do not always agree. Sometimes we have fought among ourselves. But Running Bear's story has united us. It has shown us what is possible when people choose compassion over hatred." One by one, representatives from the other tribes began dismounting and approaching. Jacob watched, his heart in his throat, as men from 7 different peoples walked onto his land. Some were young warriors painted for ceremony. Others were elders moving slowly but with dignity. A few were medicine men or spiritual leaders carrying sacred objects. They formed a wide circle around Jacob and Chief White Eagle. The silence was profound. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then something remarkable happened. Each tribal representative came forward and placed something at Jacob's feet. A woven blanket with intricate patterns, a piece of pottery smooth and beautiful, bundles of dried corn and beans, strips of dried meat, beadwork that must have taken months to create, a small drum, a carved pipe, a necklace made of turquoise and silver. Jacob stared at the growing pile of gifts, overwhelmed. These people had little enough for themselves, especially with the drought affecting everyone. And yet they were giving to him. "We honor you," Standing Wolf said, "not just for saving one life, but for giving us all hope that peace might be possible." Chief White Eagle spoke again, and Standing Wolf's translation made Jacob's throat tighten. "The chiefs of the 7 tribes wish to make you an offer. It is an offer that has never been made to a white man before, and may never be made again." Jacob looked around at all the faces watching him, young and old, warrior and elder, 7 tribes united for this moment. He couldn't find words to speak. "We wish to make your land sacred neutral ground," Standing Wolf said. "A place where all people, native and settler, can meet in peace. A place under the protection of the 7 tribes. In exchange, you must give us your word that you will treat all who come here with the same respect you showed Running Bear, that you will be a bridge between our peoples, that you will never turn away someone in need, regardless of who they are or where they come from." Jacob's mind spun. They were offering him protection, help, a chance to survive this drought. But they were also asking him to become something more than just a rancher. They were asking him to become a peacemaker, a neutral ground in the middle of a territory torn by violence and distrust. He thought about his wife, about her belief that everyone had a purpose. He thought about the wounded man in his barn, and how a simple act of sharing water had led to this impossible moment. He looked at Chief White Eagle, at the hope and trust in the old man's eyes. "I give you my word," Jacob said, his voice clear and strong. "I will honor all who come here with respect. I will treat every person as I would want to be treated. This land will be open to anyone who comes in peace." Chief White Eagle smiled, deep lines crinkling around his eyes. He said something short in his language, then clasped Jacob's hand in both of his. Standing Wolf translated. "Then let it be done." What happened next would change Jacob's life forever. The chiefs gathered closer, forming an inner circle, and began to chant. It was a sound unlike anything Jacob had ever heard, ancient and powerful. The sound of 7 different voices, 7 different traditions coming together as one. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, Jacob Morrison's small, struggling ranch became something new. It became a symbol. It became holy ground. It became a place where miracles would happen. And it all started because one man decided to share his water with a dying stranger. As the chanting continued, more members of the 7 tribes dismounted and joined the ceremony. Jacob stood in the center of it all, feeling like he'd stepped into a dream. The sound of their voices rose and fell, carrying across his dry land like water over stones. Chief White Eagle gestured for Jacob to sit. Someone had placed a beautiful woven blanket on the ground, and Jacob lowered himself onto it. The chiefs of the other 6 tribes came forward one by one, each sitting in a circle around him. Standing Wolf remained standing, ready to translate. The chiefs were a remarkable sight. Each wore the traditional clothing of his people, different in style and decoration, but equally impressive. Some had feathers in their hair. Others wore painted symbols on their faces. One older Hopi chief had a necklace made entirely of bear claws. A younger Navajo leader wore silver jewelry that caught the fading sunlight. Chief White Eagle spoke first, his words measured and important. Standing Wolf translated carefully. "We will now make the sacred pact. This is not a simple agreement. This is a covenant that will be remembered by our children and our children's children. What we do here today, under this sky, on this ground, will echo through time." One of the other chiefs, a broad-shouldered Zuni man with gray streaking his long black hair, spoke next. "I am Chief Running Water," Standing Wolf translated. "For 30 winters I have led my people. Never in all that time have we sat in peace with so many tribes at once. The white man's coming has brought us much pain. Many of my people have died from their diseases, their weapons, their broken promises. I had no love left in my heart for any settler." He paused, looking directly at Jacob. "But what you did for Running Bear was not the act of an enemy. It was the act of a brother. You have reminded me that hatred is a choice and we can choose differently." Another chief spoke, this one from the Pueblo people. He was thin and tall, with eyes that seemed to look right through a person. "The white men take and take. They take our land, our water, our buffalo, our sacred places. They give us nothing but death and sorrow. This is what I have seen for all my life." Jacob felt shame wash over him. He knew these words were true. He'd seen it himself. Settlers pushing further and further west, taking what they wanted, treating the native peoples like they were less than human. "But you gave," the Pueblo chief continued through Standing Wolf's translation. "You gave water, which is life itself. You gave care to a wounded enemy. You gave respect to someone your people call savage. In giving, you have shown us that not all white hearts are stone." One by one, each chief spoke. Some told stories of violence and betrayal. Others spoke of loved ones lost to war and disease. One Paiute chief, who looked to be in his 80s, wept openly as he talked about his son, killed by settlers 5 years ago for the crime of hunting on land his ancestors had hunted for generations. Jacob listened to it all, his heart growing heavier with each story. He'd known things were bad, but hearing it directly from these men, seeing the pain in their eyes, made it real in a way it had never been before. Finally, Chief White Eagle spoke again. "We have shared our grief with you, Jacob Morrison, because you have earned the right to hear it, not through blood or conquest, but through compassion. Now we offer you something in return." He pulled out a leather cord with a large medallion hanging from it. The medallion was made of silver and turquoise, worked into a design that incorporated symbols from all 7 tribes. It must have taken skilled craftsmen days to create. "This is the mark of the Friend of 7 Tribes," Standing Wolf translated. "Only 2 others in all of history have ever carried this mark. One was a Spanish priest who saved an entire village from plague. The other was a trapper who died protecting native children from wolves. You are the third. Wear this, and every member of these 7 tribes will know you are under our protection. Any harm that comes to you will be answered by all of us." Chief White Eagle stood and placed the medallion around Jacob's neck. It was heavy, both in weight and in meaning. "But this protection comes with responsibility," Standing Wolf continued. "Your land is now neutral ground. Here no blood may be shed, no revenge may be taken, no old grudges may be settled. Anyone who comes here must leave their weapons and their hatred at the boundary. This place will be for talking, for trading, for healing. Can you accept this burden?" Jacob touched the medallion, feeling the cool metal against his chest. "I can. I will." Another chief spoke, the young Navajo with the silver jewelry. "We will do more than just protect you. We will help you survive. The drought that kills your cattle kills our crops too. We suffer together. But my people know where water can still be found even when the earth looks dead. We will share this knowledge with you." A Yavapai chief added his voice. "My people are skilled with horses and cattle. We will teach you ways to help your animals survive on less water and food. We will trade with you fairly and honestly. Your ranch will not fail, as long as you keep your word to us." The Hopi chief with the bear claw necklace spoke about spiritual protection. "We will perform ceremonies here to bless this land and keep evil spirits away. This ground will be sacred, protected not just by warriors but by the old powers that have watched over this land since the beginning of time." As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant reds and oranges, the ceremony continued. The chief stood and began to walk the boundaries of Jacob's property. At 7 points around his land, they stopped and planted tall wooden posts. Each post was carved with symbols and painted in different colors representing the 7 tribes. Jacob walked with them, witnessing the ritual. At each post, all 7 chiefs would touch it and speak words in their own languages. The warriors who had remained mounted now joined in, creating a ring of people around each post. The chanting was beautiful and haunting, unlike any music Jacob had ever heard. Standing Wolf explained as they walked. "These posts mark this land as protected. They tell everyone, native and settler alike, that this place is different, sacred. Any who would bring violence here will face the anger of 7 tribes united." By the time they finished planting the 7th post, full darkness had fallen, but the ceremony wasn't over. The tribes built fires, 7 of them, arranged in a circle around Jacob's cabin. The light from the flames danced across hundreds of faces. Someone produced drums, others had flutes made from bone and wood. Music filled the night air and people began to dance. Not a war dance, but something celebratory. Jacob watched, mesmerized. Then he noticed something that made his breath catch. In the distance, beyond his property line, he could see lights from other fires. Settlers, his neighbors. They'd seen the gathering and had come to investigate, though they remained at a distance, afraid or uncertain. Among them, Jacob could make out the large form of William Garrett. Even from far away, he could feel the man's anger and confusion. What Garrett was witnessing went against everything he believed. Natives and a settler together in peace. It must have seemed impossible to him. Chief White Eagle noticed Jacob looking at the distant fires. He spoke, and Standing Wolf translated. "Let them see. Let them wonder. Perhaps seeing that peace is possible will plant a seed in their hearts. Or perhaps they will become your enemies. Either way, you are not alone anymore." As the night wore on, people from the tribes came to speak with Jacob. Some thanked him for saving Running Bear. Others simply wanted to touch his hand, to see the man who had sparked this gathering with their own eyes. The younger warriors looked at him with curiosity. The elders looked at him with something like hope. One woman, middle-aged with kind eyes, approached with a young boy holding her hand. Through Standing Wolf, she explained that her son had been sick, dying from a fever. The white doctor in the nearby town had refused to treat him. But a settler woman, a widow who lived alone, had snuck them medicine and cared for the boy until the fever broke. "Not all of your people are bad," she said, "just as not all of mine are good. But there are enough good ones to matter. You are proof of that." Food was shared. The dried corn and beans that had been gifted to Jacob were prepared over the fires. Meat was roasted. Stories were told. Standing Wolf stayed by Jacob's side most of the night, translating and explaining customs and traditions. Jacob learned that Running Bear was not just Chief White Eagle's grandson. He was also a bridge between the tribes, someone who spoke multiple languages and had been working tirelessly for peace. He almost died for that peace, Standing Wolf said quietly. The men who shot him were settlers hired to hunt natives. They don't care about peace. They care about money. There are people on both sides who profit from our suffering and violence. As midnight approached, Chief White Eagle raised his hand for silence. The music and talking stopped. In the sudden quiet he spoke. His voice was tired but powerful. Standing Wolf translated. This day will be remembered. Tell your children of it. Tell your grandchildren. Tell them that once, for one perfect day, 7 tribes came together not for war but for peace. Tell them that one man's kindness sparked a light in the darkness. That light may flicker. It may dim. But as long as we remember, it will never completely go out. He turned to Jacob. You have given us hope. We give you our protection, our help, and our friendship. May your life be long. Jacob woke to voices outside his cabin. For a moment, panic seized him. Then he remembered the events of the previous day and relaxed. He got up, splashed water on his face from his wash basin, and stepped outside into the morning light. What he saw took his breath away. The 7 tribes hadn't left. If anything, more people had arrived. Dozens of families had set up camps around his property, creating a temporary village. Children ran between the tents laughing and playing. Women worked at cooking fires, preparing breakfast. Men tended to horses and talked in groups. And in the distance, Jacob could see more of his settler neighbors. They'd gathered on the ridge overlooking his property, watching everything with a mixture of fear, anger, and curiosity. He recognized Garrett's large figure among them. Standing Wolf approached, smiling. Good morning, friend Jacob. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in months, Jacob admitted. But I'm surprised everyone is still here. Chief White Eagle wishes to fulfill his promise, Kenroy, Standing Wolf explained. He said we would help you find water. We cannot do that if we leave immediately. 2 elderly men approached, walking slowly and leaning on carved walking sticks. Their faces were deeply lined, their hair completely white. Standing Wolf introduced them. These are the water finders. One is from my Apache people, the other is Hopi. Between them they have found water for our peoples for over 100 winters. Jacob bowed his head respectfully. I'm honored. The 2 elders walked around Jacob's property, moving slowly and deliberately. They would stop frequently, close their eyes, and stand completely still for several minutes. Sometimes they would kneel and place their hands flat on the ground. Other times they would pull out small pouches and sprinkle something on the earth, then smell the soil. Jacob followed at a respectful distance, fascinated. He'd heard stories of water witchers and dowsers, but he'd never actually seen anyone try to find water this way. Most settlers just dug where they hoped water might be and prayed they got lucky. After about 2 hours, the elders converged on a spot about 50 yards from Jacob's cabin. It was a small depression in the land, nothing that seemed special or different from anywhere else on his property. But both men pointed to the exact same spot and nodded to each other. The Apache elder spoke, his voice cracked with age. Standing Wolf translated, Here, the water flows strong here, deep below. The earth tells us so. The spirits guide us to it. Chief White Eagle had been watching from a distance. Now he came forward and examined the spot himself. He knelt, placed his palm flat on the ground, and closed his eyes for a long moment. Then he nodded. They are right. This is the place, and how deep? Jacob asked. He'd never dug a well before, and the thought of digging one now seemed daunting. The Hopi elder held his hands apart, measuring something only he could see. Through Standing Wolf, he said, perhaps the height of 2 tall men. Maybe less. The water is close, but it has been hiding, waiting to be found. Word spread quickly through the camp. Within an hour, a work party had assembled. 20 young warriors, strong and eager, volunteered to help dig. They brought tools, some their own and some borrowed from Jacob's small collection. Shovels, picks, and a bucket tied to a rope for hauling out dirt. The digging began just after noon when the sun was hottest. Jacob tried to help, but the young men waved him off. You are the friend of 7 tribes, one of them said through Standing Wolf. You gave water. Now we give work. So Jacob watched, bringing water from his well to the workers, offering what little he had. The men dug in shifts, 4 at a time, working in the hole while others rested. They sang as they worked, songs in languages Jacob didn't understand but that somehow felt appropriate for the task. The pile of dirt beside the hole grew higher and higher. 6 feet down, 8 feet down,
10 feet down.
Still no water. Some of the settlers on the ridge began laughing and pointing. Jacob could imagine what they were saying. Fool Morrison listening to savage superstitions. There's no water there. He's wasting his time and making a fool of himself. But the workers didn't stop. The elders stood nearby, their eyes closed, occasionally nodding or making small adjustments to where the diggers should focus their efforts. 12 feet down. The hole was deep now, and they'd rigged up a ladder made from rope and wood so the diggers could climb in and out. The workers were covered in dust and sweat, but they showed no signs of giving up. Then, just as the sun was starting to sink toward evening, one of the young men in the hole let out a shout. Jacob's heart leaped. He rushed to the edge and looked down. The bottom of the hole was wet. Not just damp, but actually wet. Water was seeping up through the soil, slowly at first, then faster. Within minutes it was pooling at the bottom, rising visibly. A cheer went up from everyone watching. The workers scrambled out of the hole, laughing and slapping each other on the back. The elders nodded slowly, satisfied. Chief White Eagle raised his hands to the sky and spoke words that needed no translation. He was giving thanks. Jacob dropped to his knees at the edge of the hole, staring at the water below. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Clear, cold water rising steadily, already several inches deep and still coming. His eyes filled with tears, and he didn't care who saw them fall. Standing Wolf put a hand on his shoulder. The earth has blessed you, friend Jacob. This is good water, sweet and strong. It will not run dry. Over the next few hours, they worked to shore up the well, lining it with stones to keep the walls from collapsing. They built a simple windlass and bucket system so Jacob could draw water easily. And all the while, the water kept rising. By nightfall, the well was 15 feet deep with 12 feet of water in it. More water than Jacob had seen in months. More than enough for his cattle, himself, and anyone else who needed it. Word of the discovery spread beyond the camp. Some of the settlers on the ridge came down, curiosity overcoming their suspicion. They stood at the edge of Jacob's property, not quite willing to cross the boundary marked by the 7 posts, but close enough to see what was happening. One of them, a younger rancher named Tom Fletcher, who owned land to the east, called out, "Morrison, that water real, or are you just playing tricks?" Jacob walked to the property line, careful not to invite anyone in without knowing their intentions. "It's real, Tom. Clearest, coldest water I've ever tasted. Where'd you find it? We've all been looking for months." Jacob gestured back toward where the native elders stood. They found it. Used methods passed down from their ancestors. Tom looked uncomfortable. Behind him, William Garrett pushed forward. His face was red, and not just from the sun. "So now you're one of them, Morrison. Turned your back on your own kind?" "I haven't turned my back on anyone, Garrett," Jacob said evenly. "I helped a man who needed help. These people returned that kindness. That's all there is to it." "That's not all there is to it," Garrett exploded. "You're harboring savages on your land. You're taking their side, making the rest of us look bad." "The only one making you look bad is you," Jacob said. "Now, if you've come in peace and you're thirsty, you're welcome to some water. If you've come to cause trouble, you can leave." Several of the settlers muttered among themselves. Some looked intrigued. Others looked angry. Tom Fletcher seemed torn, looking back and forth between the well and Garrett. Finally, Tom took a step forward, crossing the boundary. "I came to see the truth with my own eyes, and I'm thirsty. I'd appreciate some water if you're offering." Garrett grabbed his arm. "You cross that line, Fletcher, and you're as much a traitor as Morrison." Tom shook off the grip. "I'm a thirsty man accepting water from a neighbor, Garrett. If that makes me a traitor in your eyes, so be it." He walked onto Jacob's property and toward the well. 2 more settlers followed, then 3 more. Soon about a dozen had crossed the line, leaving Garrett and a few others standing alone on the ridge. Garrett stared at them all with fury in his eyes, then turned and rode away hard, his horse kicking up dust. The settlers who'd come forward were nervous around the native people, and the native people were equally wary of them. But everyone was thirsty, and the water was right there, fresh and cold. Standing Wolf suggested that Jacob draw the first bucket as a symbolic gesture. He did, and offered it first to Chief White Eagle, who drank and nodded his approval. Then Jacob offered it to Tom Fletcher, who hesitated only a moment before drinking deeply. "That's the best water I've had in a year," Tom said, wiping his mouth. "Where'd those old-timers learn to find water like that?" "Knowledge passed down for generations," Standing Wolf explained. "We have lived on this land for longer than anyone can remember. We know where the water hides. Another settler, an older woman named Helen who ran a small farm by herself, spoke up. Could you find water on other properties? Lord knows we're all suffering from this drought. The Apache elder through Standing Wolf said we could try, but we would only do so for those who come in peace. Those who respect our ways and our people. Over the next hour, something remarkable happened. Settlers and natives who just days ago would have shot each other on sight shared water from the same well. They didn't become friends, not yet. The distrust was too deep for that, but they were civil. They talked carefully at first about the drought, about cattle, about the land. 3 weeks had passed since the discovery of the well, and Jacob's property had transformed into something he never could have imagined. The temporary camp of the 7 tribes had become semi-permanent. Families stayed for days or weeks at a time before rotating out, always leaving enough people to maintain a presence and help with the work. The well was producing more water than anyone had hoped. It flowed strong and constant, enough not just for Jacob's 15 cattle but for many more. Word had spread throughout the territory, and a steady trickle of both settlers and natives came to Jacob's land, some for water, some out of curiosity, some looking for something they couldn't quite name. Jacob's routine had changed completely. He still tended his cattle, but now he had help. Young warriors from different tribes had taught him techniques for managing livestock on sparse grazing land. They showed him which plants the cattle could eat that he'd thought were useless weeds. They demonstrated how to rotate the herd to different parts of his property so the land could recover. His cattle were actually getting healthier despite the ongoing drought. 3 of his cows were pregnant, which seemed like a miracle in itself. One of the Navajo men, a quiet fellow named Gray Fox, had a gift with animals and spent hours each day tending to the herd, checking them for illness or injury. But it wasn't just the natives helping Jacob. After Tom Fletcher's visit, other settlers had started coming around cautiously at first. Helen, the older woman farmer, came twice a week to trade eggs and vegetables for water. She'd struck up an unlikely friendship with one of the Hopi women, and the 2 of them could often be seen talking about growing techniques, comparing their different approaches to coaxing life from the stubborn earth. A young couple, Daniel and Ruth, who were trying to start a farm to the north, began visiting regularly. They were new to the territory, having arrived just before the drought started, and they didn't carry the same deep-seated prejudices that men like Garrett did. Ruth was pregnant and due in a few months. The native women had taken her under their wing, sharing knowledge about pregnancy and childbirth that Ruth found both fascinating and comforting. Not everyone was happy about these developments. Garrett had made his displeasure known throughout the territory. He'd given a speech at the Sunday church gathering in the nearest town, calling Jacob a traitor and demanding that good Christian people refuse to associate with him. Some had listened, but others had looked at their dying cattle, their empty wells, their suffering families, and decided that survival mattered more than Garrett's hatred. On this particular morning, Jacob was repairing fence posts when he saw a rider approaching from the east. He recognized the horse before he recognized the rider. It was Running Bear. Jacob's heart lifted. He'd been hoping to see the young man whose life he'd saved, but Running Bear had been away, continuing his work as a messenger between tribes. Now he was back, sitting tall on his horse, looking healthy and strong. The wound had healed completely, though Jacob knew there would be a scar. Running Bear dismounted and approached. His English was limited, but he'd been practicing. "Friend Jacob," he said, the words careful but clear. "I come back." Jacob clasped his arm in greeting, the way he'd learned was customary. "It's good to see you well, Running Bear." Standing Wolf emerged from one of the tents where he'd been staying. He'd become something of a permanent resident, serving as the main translator and liaison between Jacob and the various tribal visitors. "Running Bear has news," Standing Wolf said. "Good news and troubling news." They sat under the shade of Jacob's porch. Running Bear spoke in his language, and Standing Wolf translated. "The peace talks between the tribes have been successful, more successful than anyone dared hope. Your act of kindness and what came from it has inspired leaders to look past old grudges. We are talking about forming a council of tribes, something that has never existed before." "That's wonderful," Jacob said, genuinely pleased. "But," Standing Wolf continued, "there is resistance, not just from settlers like Garrett, but from some of our own people too. There are young warriors who want war, not peace. They have seen their families killed, their land stolen. They believe the only answer is to fight until the white man is driven back across the great river. And there are white men in positions of power, in the army and the territorial government, who see any peace with natives as weakness. They want us all on reservations or dead. Running Bear spoke again, more urgently this time. Standing Wolf's face grew grim as he translated. There are rumors of a group planning to attack this place. To destroy what you have built here as a symbol. They want to prove that peace is impossible, that settlers and natives can never coexist. Jacob felt ice in his stomach. When? We don't know. Maybe soon, maybe not for weeks. But Running Bear wanted to warn you. You could be in danger. What about everyone here? Jacob gestured to the camp, to the families with children, to the elders who had stayed to teach and guide. We have warriors, Standing Wolf said. They will fight to defend this place if needed. But there could be bloodshed on sacred ground. That would destroy everything we are trying to build. Jacob thought hard. What if we could show them? Really show them that this works? Not just with a few open-minded people, but with a larger community. What if we held a gathering, a big one, and invited everyone? Settlers and natives alike. A trade fair, maybe. A celebration. Standing Wolf looked skeptical. Many would refuse to come. Some would, Jacob agreed. But some would come out of curiosity. Others would come for the trade opportunities. If we could get enough people here all mixing and talking and trading peacefully, it might change some minds, or at least make it harder for the violent ones to act. Running Bear listened to the translation and nodded slowly. He spoke, and Standing Wolf smiled slightly. He says you think like one of us now. Always looking for the path of peace first, but being ready for war if it comes. Over the next week, Jacob threw himself into organizing what he was calling the Seven Stones Gathering. The name had caught on naturally. His property was being referred to as Seven Stones Ranch now, after the painted posts and the 7 stones Running Bear had given him. Chief White Eagle, when informed of the plan, gave his blessing and support. The 7 tribes agreed to send representatives with goods for trading. Craftspeople would bring their wares: blankets, pottery, jewelry, carved items, dried foods, and herbs. They would demonstrate their skills and teach anyone interested in learning. Getting settlers to participate was harder. Jacob rode to every property within a day's travel, extending personal invitations. Many doors were slammed in his face. Some people told him to leave and never come back. One old rancher actually shot at him, though whether he was aiming to hit or to scare was unclear, but others listened. Tom Fletcher agreed to bring some of his cattle to trade. Helen said she'd bring her preserves and baked goods. Daniel and Ruth volunteered to help organize things. A blacksmith from town, a gruff man named Pete who'd always kept to himself, surprised everyone by agreeing to come and demonstrate his craft. Even the local preacher, Reverend Matthews, agreed to attend, though he made it clear he was coming to observe and ensure Christian values were maintained. Jacob took that as a victory anyway. At least he was coming. The gathering was set for 3 weeks out on the first weekend of September. Jacob worked himself nearly to exhaustion preparing. He built simple tables and benches. He cleared and leveled an area for demonstrations and performances. He organized a system for trading, since some settlers had goods and some natives had goods, but they'd need a way to determine fair exchanges. Standing Wolf suggested using small wooden tokens as a temporary currency. Everyone brings what they have. We assign token values based on quality and demand. People trade their goods for tokens, then use tokens to buy other goods. At the end, any leftover tokens can be exchanged back for goods. It's how some tribes already trade with each other. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Jacob had the tokens made, each one carved with a small version of the 7 stone symbol. As the date approached, more and more people confirmed they would come. Word had spread beyond the immediate territory. Some people were traveling from 2 or 3 days away. Jacob's little ranch was about to become the center of something much bigger than he'd ever imagined. But not everyone was pleased. Garrett rode by one afternoon, staying just outside the property line. He didn't dismount, just sat on his horse glaring. "You're making a mistake, Morrison," he called out. "Mixing with these savages, acting like they're equal to us. It's unnatural, it's ungodly, and it's going to bring trouble down on all of us." "The only trouble I see is the trouble that people like you bring, Garrett," Jacob replied. "These people have shown me nothing but respect and kindness. They've helped me survive. I'm not going to turn my back on them just because it makes you uncomfortable." "You'll regret this," Garrett said. "Mark my words. This little piece you've built is going to crumble, and when it does, don't come crying to the rest of us for help." He rode away, leaving Jacob with an uneasy feeling. Garrett wasn't just angry. He was making threats. Jacob mentioned the encounter to Standing Wolf and the tribal leaders. "We will have scouts watching during the gathering," Chief White Eagle said through Standing Wall. By mid-morning, Jacob's property looked like something out of a dream. Over 200 people had gathered, the largest assembly anyone in the territory had ever seen. Settler families arrived in wagons, their children peeking out with wide eyes. Native families came on horseback or on foot, their traditional dress creating splashes of color against the dusty landscape. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Settlers clustered on one side of the cleared area. Natives gathered on the other. Both groups watched each other warily, hands never far from weapons despite the agreement that this was neutral ground. Jacob stood in the middle, literally and figuratively. He wore his everyday work clothes, but the medallion of the Friend of Seven Tribes hung prominently around his neck. Standing Wolf stood beside him, ready to translate. Chief White Eagle and the other tribal leaders formed a line behind them. On the settler side, Reverend Matthews stood with Tom Fletcher, Helen, and about 30 other families who'd been brave enough to attend. Noticeably absent was Garrett and his supporters. But Jacob could feel eyes watching from the ridges surrounding his property. Not everyone who stayed away had stayed home. Some were just waiting to see what would happen. Jacob raised his hands for attention. The murmur of conversation gradually died down. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying across the gathering. "I know this isn't easy. I know there's fear and distrust on both sides. I know some of you only came because you needed water or goods, not because you believe in peace. That's okay. You're here. That's what matters." Standing Wolf translated for those who didn't understand English. Running Bear did the same in another native language. It was slow going, but everyone was patient. 3 weeks ago, I was alone on a dying ranch with no hope, Jacob continued. Then I made a choice. I helped someone who needed help, not because of what he was or where he came from, but because he was a human being in pain. That choice changed my life. The 7 tribes came and offered me friendship, protection, and knowledge. They helped me find water. They taught me how to keep my cattle alive. They gave me hope. He paused, looking around at all the faces watching him. But they did more than help me survive. They showed me that we're not so different. We all want the same things. Water for our families, food for our children, safety for our homes, a future that's better than the past. The color of our skin or the language we speak doesn't change those basic needs. A few people in the settler crowd shifted uncomfortably. A woman in the back looked like she wanted to argue, but no one spoke up. "Today is about showing that we can share space without bloodshed," Jacob said. "There are people here with goods to trade, skills to demonstrate, stories to tell. I'm asking everyone to put aside your weapons and your hatred just for today. Trade fairly. Talk honestly. Let your children play together. See what happens when we try being human to each other." Chief White Eagle stepped forward and spoke. Standing Wolf translated, "My people have suffered greatly at the hands of white settlers. Our lands have been taken. Our families have been killed. Our way of life is dying. These are truths that cannot be denied. But hatred is a poison that kills the one who drinks it. My grandson Running Bear almost died. He was saved by this man, a settler who could have been our enemy but chose to be our friend. If we cannot see past our anger and pain, we will all die, native and settler alike. This land is big enough for all of us if we are willing to share." Reverend Matthews stepped forward from the settler's side. Jacob tensed, unsure what the preacher would say. Matthews was known for his stern sermons about sin and righteousness. "I came here today with doubt in my heart," Matthews began. "I've preached that we settlers are doing God's work, bringing civilization to a savage land. But standing here looking at all of you, I wonder if I've been wrong." He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "The Bible teaches that we should love our neighbors. It doesn't specify that those neighbors must look like us or speak like us. Jacob Morrison has shown Christian charity in its truest form. Maybe we all have something to learn from that." It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but coming from Matthews, it was huge. Some of the settlers looked shocked. Others nodded slowly, as if permission from their spiritual leader had freed them to consider new ideas. With the formal opening complete, the gathering began in earnest. The trading area opened first. Native craftspeople displayed their wares on blankets spread on the ground. Intricate beadwork, beautiful pottery, woven baskets that were both functional and artistic. Herbs and medicines prepared using ancient knowledge. Dried meats and preserved foods that could last through winter. Settlers brought their own goods. Iron tools from Pete the blacksmith. Preserves and baked goods from Helen and other farm wives. Fabric and sewing supplies. Seeds for planting. A few even brought books, precious commodities on the frontier. At first, people just looked. Settlers would walk past native displays without stopping. Natives would glance at settler goods and move on. The invisible wall between them seemed impenetrable. Then a small miracle happened. Helen, the older farm woman, stopped at a display of pottery. A Hopi woman, perhaps 50 years old, sat behind the display. Helen picked up a large clay pot, examining its smooth surface and elegant design. "How much?" Helen asked, holding up the pot. The Hopi woman held up 6 fingers, indicating 6 tokens. Helen nodded and counted out 6 wooden tokens. But then she paused. "Wait," she said. She pulled out a small jar from her basket. "I make apple butter. Would you like to try some?" The Hopi woman looked uncertain. Standing Wolf, who was nearby, translated. A smile broke across the woman's face and she nodded. Helen opened the jar and offered a taste on a wooden spoon. The Hopi woman's eyes widened in delight. She said something in her language. "She says it's wonderful," Standing Wolf translated. "She asks if you would teach her to make it." "I'd be happy to," Helen said, grinning. "If you'd teach me how to make pots like this one." Just like that, the ice broke. Other people started approaching displays, asking questions, making trades. Pete the blacksmith ended up in a long conversation with a native craftsman about different techniques for working metal and wood. A settler woman who made quilts traded one to a Navajo woman for a beautifully woven blanket, both of them admiring each other's work. The children were the first to truly break down barriers. Despite their parents' wariness, kids are kids. A group of settler children were playing with a ball when it rolled toward where some native children were sitting. A little native boy, maybe 6 years old, picked up the ball and threw it back. One of the settler girls waved for him to join their game. His mother looked nervous but didn't stop him. Within minutes, a dozen children were playing together, their laughter cutting through the tension like sunlight through clouds. By afternoon, the atmosphere had completely transformed. People were actually talking, laughing even. A group of young warriors demonstrated their skill with bows, hitting targets from incredible distances. Some of the settler men, their competitive nature sparked, wanted to try. There was good-natured ribbing about who was the better shot. Native women showed settler women how to tan hides and prepare certain plants for medicine. In return, settler women shared their techniques for preserving food in jars and making soap. Pete the blacksmith repaired tools for natives who needed it, refusing payment because, as he said gruffly, good work is its own reward. Musicians from both sides began playing. Someone had brought a fiddle. Another person had a mouth harp. Native drums and flutes joined in. The music was strange at first, 2 different traditions trying to find common rhythm, but gradually, impossibly, it started to work. A melody emerged that was neither purely settler nor purely native, but something new. Something that belonged to both. People began to dance. Not the formal dances of either tradition, just spontaneous movement born of joy and relief. Old tensions were melting away, replaced by cautious hope. This was working. Against all odds, it was actually working. Jacob stood watching it all, Standing Wolf beside him, both men amazed at what they were witnessing. "Do you see that?" Jacob whispered, pointing to where Ruth, the pregnant settler woman, was sitting with a circle of native women. They were all laughing about something, their hands moving as they shared stories about pregnancy and childbirth. Language barriers meant nothing when the subject was universal. "I see it," Standing Wolf replied. "I see my people trading fairly instead of raiding. I see your people treating us like humans instead of animals to be hunted. I see children playing together like they don't know they're supposed to be enemies." This is what Running Bear dreamed of, what all of us dreamed of. But even in that moment of triumph, Jacob felt uneasy. His eyes kept drifting to the ridges surrounding his property. Something wasn't right. He couldn't put his finger on it, but years of living alone on the frontier had given him good instincts for danger. "Do you feel it?" he asked Standing Wolf quietly. "Yes," Standing Wolf replied, his smile fading. "We are being watched. Not just watched, studied, like prey." Running Bear approached, his face tense. He spoke rapidly in his language. Standing Wolf's expression darkened as he listened. "The scouts have seen movement in the hills," Standing Wolf translated. 29 years had passed since that first gathering. Jacob Morrison was 71 years old now, his hair completely white, his hands gnarled with arthritis, his back bent from decades of hard work. But his eyes were still sharp and his heart was still strong. He sat on the porch of his cabin, which had been expanded over the years into a proper house. Around him, Seven Stones Ranch had transformed into something that seemed impossible back in 1887. What had started as a dying piece of land was now a thriving community. The well that the native elders had found still flowed strong, sweeter than ever. Around it had grown a permanent settlement. Houses and buildings dotted his original 200 acres, which had expanded over time as neighbors sold or gifted him land, wanting to be part of what Seven Stones represented. There was a trading post now, run by Tom Fletcher's son, a school where both settler and native children learned together, taught by teachers from both communities. A meeting hall where the Council of Seven Tribes gathered every month to discuss matters affecting everyone in the territory. Even a small medical clinic where a white doctor and a native medicine woman worked side by side, combining their knowledge to help anyone who needed it. Jacob watched the activity around him with deep satisfaction. Children of all backgrounds played in the dusty street, their laughter universal. A native woman was teaching a settler girl how to weave baskets. Two old men, one settler and one Hopi, sat in the shade arguing about the best way to grow corn, a debate they'd been having for 20 years with neither willing to concede defeat. Standing Wolf, now in his 60s with gray streaking his dark hair, climbed the porch steps slowly. His own joints weren't what they used to be. He settled into the chair next to Jacob with a grateful sigh. "Getting old is terrible," Standing Wolf said in English, which he now spoke perfectly after decades of practice. "Better than the alternative," Jacob replied, a response that had become their standard joke. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the world they'd helped create. Not every day had been peaceful over the past 3 decades. There had been challenges, conflicts, moments when it seemed everything might fall apart. Garrett had tried twice more to cause trouble before he'd finally died 10 years ago, bitter and alone. There had been raids from hostile tribes who saw the peace as weakness. There had been government officials who tried to force all natives onto reservations, regardless of the agreements made. But Seven Stones had endured. It had become too important, too symbolic to destroy. Even the territorial government, which had initially been hostile, had eventually recognized it as a successful experiment in peaceful coexistence. Important people from back east had visited. Newspaper writers had written articles about the miracle of Seven Stones. It had become proof that different peoples could live together if they tried. Chief White Eagle had passed away 5 years ago, surrounded by family and friends. Jacob had been there, holding the old chief's hand as he took his last breath. "You kept your promise," White Eagle had whispered in English, words he'd learned just so Jacob would understand. Sacred ground stays sacred. Running Bear now led the Apache delegation to the council. He was a grandfather himself, with 3 grandchildren who played with settler children without a second thought. His gunshot scar had faded but never disappeared, a permanent reminder of how close he'd come to death and how one act of kindness had changed everything. Helen had passed 2 years ago. The entire community had mourned. Both natives and settlers had attended her funeral, and her daughter now ran the bakery that Helen had started, still making the apple butter that had broken the ice at that first gathering. Ruth and Daniel's daughter, now a woman of 28, taught at the school. She'd grown up playing with native children, learning their languages and customs as naturally as her own. She'd married a young man who was half Navajo, half settler, and their children represented the future that Seven Stones had been building toward all along. "I've been thinking about that day," Standing Wolf said, breaking the silence. "The day you found Running Bear bleeding by your well. If you'd walked the other direction that afternoon, if you'd decided he wasn't worth your water, all of this." He gestured at the bustling community around them. "None of it would exist. Someone else would have done something," Jacob said modestly. "No," Standing Wolf said firmly. "That's the lie we tell ourselves to avoid responsibility for our choices. You made a choice. You chose compassion when hate would have been easier. You chose to risk everything for a stranger. That mattered. Your choice mattered." Jacob didn't respond immediately. He thought about his wife, gone for so many years now. He'd never remarried, though there had been opportunities. Seven Stones had been his life, his purpose, his family. He'd helped hundreds of people over the years, mediated countless disputes, shared his water with anyone who needed it, never asking for anything in return except that they respect the sanctity of neutral ground. "Do you think it'll last?" Jacob asked quietly. "After we're gone, will young people remember why this matters?" Standing Wolf considered the question. "Some will forget. Some will take it for granted. That's human nature. But others will remember. We've made sure of that." The story of Seven Stones is told around fires, in schoolrooms, in council meetings. Children grow up knowing about the rancher who gave water to a dying native and changed the world. A young boy ran up to the porch breathing hard. He was maybe 8 years old, with dark hair and skin that suggested mixed heritage. "Mr. Morrison. Mr. Morrison, my mama says to tell you that Mrs. Winters is having her baby and needs help." Jacob started to rise, but Standing Wolf gently pushed him back down. "You rest, old friend. I'll make sure someone gets to her." He called out to a woman passing by, relaying the message. Within seconds, people were hurrying toward the clinic. The boy lingered on the porch, looking at Jacob with wide, admiring eyes. "Mr. Morrison, is it true you're the friend of 7 tribes? That you have magic protection?" Jacob smiled. "No magic, son. Just an agreement made a long time ago between people who wanted peace more than war." "My teacher says you're a hero," the boy said. "She says you built all of this just by being kind to someone who needed help." "Your teacher is too generous," Jacob said. "I just did what anyone should do. The real heroes are the chiefs who took a chance on peace, the families who put aside their fear and hatred to give friendship a try, the young people like your parents who chose to build a future together, instead of repeating the mistakes of the past." The boy didn't look entirely convinced that Jacob wasn't a hero, but he nodded politely before running off to play with his friends. "That child's grandparents wouldn't have spoken to each other 30 years ago," Standing Wolf observed. "They would have been enemies by default. Now their grandson doesn't even understand why that would be the case. That's how you measure success. Not in big moments, but in small ones like that." As afternoon faded toward evening, more people stopped by to visit Jacob. It had become a daily ritual. Folks would come to sit on his porch, share news, ask advice, or just spend time with the man who had founded their community. Jacob never turned anyone away. Tom Fletcher, now in his 50s and successful beyond his early dreams, stopped by with a basket of food. "Ruth wanted me to bring this. She worries you don't eat enough." "Tell her I eat plenty," Jacob protested, though he accepted the basket gratefully. His own cooking had never been very good. "The territorial governor is coming next month," Tom said. "Wants to see Seven Stones for himself. There's talk of making this place an official township, with legal protection for the neutral ground status." "That would be good," Jacob said. "Put it in writing so it can't be undone easily." Tom hesitated, then said, "Jacob, I never thanked you properly for what you did. Not just founding this place, but for showing people like me that there was another way. I was raised to think natives were less than human. You proved that wrong, and in doing so, you saved my soul as much as my ranch." Jacob clasped Tom's hand. "You did the hard part, Tom. You changed your mind. That takes more courage than most people have." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Running Bear arrived. He'd aged well, still strong and straight despite being in his 60s. He carried a bundle wrapped in leather. "Friend Jacob," he said, using the greeting they'd exchanged for nearly 3 decades. "I've brought something for you." He unwrapped the bundle carefully. Inside was a beautiful woven blanket, made with intricate patterns in rich colors. "My daughter made this. She used techniques from 3 different tribes, combining them into something new, like Seven Stones itself. We want you to have it." Jacob's eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful." "Thank you." "No," Running Bear said gently. "Thank you. You gave me life. You gave all of us hope. This blanket is a small thing compared to that debt." As darkness fell, lanterns were lit throughout the community. Music drifted from the meeting hall where young people were dancing. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. Seven Stones was alive, thriving, a testament to what humanity could achieve when it chose peace. Jacob felt tired, more tired than usual. Standing Wolf noticed and stood to leave, but Jacob waved him back down. "Stay a while longer. I want to ask you something." "Anything, old friend."